The air in the Houston command center was thin and cold, sterilized by the hum of server racks and the grim focus of the men and women who moved through the dim, blue-lit space. It was August 21, 2001, and the world had no idea that the seventh largest corporation in America was a house of cards, its foundation already eaten away by a silent, voracious termite of greed. Special Agent Bob Tucker, a man with the weary eyes of a historian who only studied tragedies, stood before a massive dry erase board. It was a spider's web of names, companies, and arrows drawn in frantic red and black. LJM, Raptors, Chuco. To an outsider, it was corporate gibberish. To Tucker and his FBI team, it was the schematic of a bomb. The epicenter was always the same, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and dread. Andrew Fastow, the chief financial officer. And behind him, the throne room of the king himself, Ken Lay. The break had come not from a whistleblower's courage, but from the dry, meticulous work of a short seller named Jim Chanos, who had looked at Enron's soaring stock price and pristine financial statements and seen a ghost. The numbers didn't add up. The profits were too smooth, the debt too neatly vanished. His report had landed on the desk of the SEC, a pebble that would start an avalanche. Now, the FBI was the avalanche. Tucker's partner, a younger agent named Mitchell, fresh from the white-collar crime unit in New York, stared at the board, his brow furrowed. "It's a shell game," Mitchell muttered, his voice low. "They're moving debt from one pocket to another, but all the pockets have holes." Tucker didn't look away from the board. "It's not a shell game, son, it's a cemetery. And we just got the map to the graves." The atmosphere was one of controlled panic, a stark contrast to the gilded halls of the Enron building just a few miles away. There, the air was thick with the scent of money and ambition, the corridors buzzing with traders who called themselves the smartest guys in the room. They had turned the staid business of energy into a casino, betting on weather patterns, bandwidth, and the very electrons flowing through power lines. The office was a monument to their success, a palace of glass and steel where the elevators were lined with mahogany and the bonuses could buy a small island. But in the FBI's command center, the only bonus was the truth, and it was proving to be a fugitive, buried under layers of legalistic obfuscation and outright lies. The investigation was a digital archaeology dig. Agents sifted through terabytes of data, a river of emails, financial models, and memoranda that stretched for millions of virtual miles. They worked in shifts around the clock, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of monitors. Surviving on bad coffee and a grim determination, the tension was a physical presence, a low-grade electric current in the air. Every email subject line was a potential tripwire. Every spreadsheet cell could hide a secret. Then, they found it. Not in a formal report, but in the casual, damning prose of an internal memo from a vice president named Sharon Watkins. She had sent it directly to Ken Lay. Mitchell read the printed page aloud, his voice barely a whisper, the words echoing in the silent room. "I am incredibly nervous that we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals." She called the Raptor entities Fastow's creations. Funny. She wrote of hidden losses and a reputation that would be shredded. It was a confession buried within the beast's own belly. Tucker felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't just about fraud. It was about a culture, a religion of avarice that had consumed every shred of conscience. He imagined Watkins typing that memo, her heart hammering against her ribs, the weight of a multi-billion-dollar secret pressing down on her. She was no saint he had benefited from the system, but in that moment, she had tried to stop the bleeding. The response from leadership had been a deafening silence, a collective decision to look the other way. The king had been warned, his castle was built on sand, and he had chosen to throw a bigger party. The weeks that followed were a blur of silent high-stakes maneuvering. The FBI, working with a small, dedicated team from the SEC, began to circle. They conducted interviews in sterile, windowless rooms, the tables bolted to the floor. They spoke to mid-level accountants, to traders, to secretaries. The story that emerged was one of breathtaking audacity. Fastow hadn't just hidden debt. He had created a hall of mirrors, a parallel universe of companies that existed only on paper to siphon off Enron's losses and enrich himself and his inner circle. He was the architect, and the building was designed to collapse, as long as he got out first. One junior accountant, a woman named Sarah with tired eyes, sat across from Tucker, her hands trembling around a styrofoam cup of water. "We all knew," she said, her voice cracking. "Not the details, but we knew. The profits, they reported. It was like magic, and you don't question the magician when you're getting paid." Tucker leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Who was the magician?" "Sarah." She looked down, a single tear tracking through her makeup. "Andy, it was always Andy. He had this smile, like he knew a joke that was going to cost you everything." The pressure built like a thunderhead. The agents watched as Enron's stock, once the darling of Wall Street, began a slow, sickening slide. The financial press, once fawning, began to ask uncomfortable questions. The air in Houston changed. The swaggering confidence of the Enron employees began to curdle into a desperate fear. You could see it in the coffee shops near their headquarters. In the way they huddled in small groups, their conversations hushed and frantic. The party was over, and the hangover was going to be historic. The climax came on a gray, drizzling morning in early December. The FBI had secured a cooperating witness, a member of Fastow's Treasury team who had decided he didn't want to go down with the ship. He provided the key, the decoder ring for the cryptic entries on the board. The Raptors were not just risky, they were bankrupt, sucking Enron's lifeblood to cover their own fictional losses. The company was a corpse, still twitching on the trading floor, but dead for months. The decision was made to move. Arrest warrants were issued for Fastow and his top lieutenants. The raid on the Enron building was a study in surreal contrast. Agents in Navy windbreakers, emblazoned with FBI, moved through the opulent lobby, their heavy footsteps echoing on the marble floor. They passed a massive, brand-new American flag hanging in the atrium, a symbol of the corporate patriotism Enron had so loudly proclaimed. Traders watched, frozen at their terminals, as the agents moved toward the executive suites. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and pure, undiluted panic. In Fastow's office, a corner space with a stunning view of the smoggy Houston skyline, Tucker stood over the CFO's desk. It was clean, obsessively so. But in the trash can, crumpled into a tight ball, was a single sheet of paper. Tucker smoothed it out. It was a handwritten calculation of a multi-million-dollar bonus, scribbled in the margin of a legal pad. The greed was so ingrained it was a reflex, even as the world was crashing down around him. The aftermath was a quiet, bureaucratic dismantling. Enron filed for bankruptcy on December 2, 2001. It was the largest corporate failure in American history at that time. Thousands of employees lost their jobs, their pensions wiped out, their life savings turned to dust. The retirement accounts, once fat with Enron stock, were now worthless. The human cost was staggering: a city of lives, financially ruined, a community shattered. The courtrooms, later, would be theaters of consequence. Ken Lay, convicted on multiple counts, would die before sentencing. Jeff Skilling, the hard-charging CEO, would go to prison for over a decade. Andrew Fastow, the architect, would trade his cooperation for a reduced sentence. A fallen Icarus who finally explained how he melted the wax. But for Agent Tucker, the real end of the story came weeks after the arrests. He was back in the command center, now being packed away, the boards wiped clean. He held a single evidence box. Inside were not complex financial instruments but the personal effects from empty desks. Family photos from employees who had trusted their leaders, a world's greatest dad. A stack of unopened paychecks for the cleaning crew who were now also out of a job. The scale of the betrayal was not in the billions of dollars lost, but in the millions of small, quiet trusts that had been obliterated. The sophisticated fraud, the complex financial engineering, it all boiled down to something simple and ancient. He closed the box, the tape screeching in the silent, empty room. The smartest guys in the room had been so clever, they had outsmarted themselves, leaving behind not a legacy of innovation, but a ghost in the machine, a phantom that had fed on the futures of thousands, its appetite limitless, its conscience a void.